warm welcome to each and everyone to this sixth edition of webinar organized by Jharkhand Legal Literacy Forum. As we all know that this Jharkhand Legal Literacy Forum was constituted for enhancing and enriching our knowledge and focusing towards the said objective, a series of webinars and discussions are being organized at regular intervals. Friends, today at this sixth edition of webinar, we have a revered jurist, Honorable Mr. Justice Rajesh Sankar, Judge Jharkhand High Court, between us as a guest speaker. His lordships will address us on the topic invoking writ jurisdiction in the tax matters. I request our senior advocate, Shri Madhusudan Mittalji, to kindly welcome our honorable guest speaker, Mr. Justice Rajesh Shankar.
A very good evening to everyone, and everyone is welcome to this webinar. A very good evening to Justice Rajesh Shankar.
Thank you.
Well, we don't need to introduce him. We all know him from ages. He was amongst us, he is one amongst us, and he will continue to be one amongst us. He is the easiest to appear before Justice Rajesh Shankar, no doubt about it. And I don't need to say much about Justice Rajesh Shankar. We've all been appearing before his court, and yes, we all know that he's so humble and nice in the court. He gives chances. It is not that if you are unable to answer any query, then that is the end of the matter. He gives enough and sufficient chances to come up with answers. He is very nice with the junior counsels also, gives them chance if the seniors are unable to come, and if the matter is going against the junior counsel, he adjourns the matter. But then he encourages junior counsels to argue the matters. Not much is actually required to be said. So for my personal, I think we must have appeared in at least 500 cases against each other. And one thing I must say, that of course you win cases, you lose cases. But whenever I used to argue against him and come out of the court, he used to tell me that, sir, you've argued very well. Whenever there used to be a judgment and in which, if suppose I succeeded, invariably he used to, not invariably, every time he used to say, congratulations. So that is a sign of humility. Not everybody can say that. Actually, it is a fact that not everybody can say that well done after you have a heated argument in the court and then you come out. It's very difficult to say that. So I will not be wasting much time. As I say, there's no need of any introduction of Justice Rajesh Shankar. Today's topic is also very interesting. That is invoking writ jurisdiction in tax matters. Why it is interesting? Because sometimes I feel that almost 50% of the cases are being disposed of on the ground of alternate remedy. So let us all, we are all very patiently hearing to hear Justice Rajesh Shankar on this issue. Sir, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mittal. Thank you so much. And I have always been the believer of the notion that we all are the students of law. Institution is comprising of the lawyers and the judges. It is a justice delivery system in which we all make our pursuit to render justice to the needy. So therefore, it is all the collective effort which we are making towards serving the institution and ultimately the people at large. I'm also thankful to Mr. Rahul Sabu, the coordinator, who is presently representing the Jharkhand Legal Literacy Forum. I must congratulate all the members of this forum, as you have truly utilized this lockdown period for the purpose of academic enhancement. I must confess to before all of you that these days I'm a bit away from taxation, tax matters, but still you have given me opportunity to recapitulate and to just share what I gathered in last few days after Mr. Rahul Sabu gave me the formal invitation for addressing this particular forum and the members. So this topic, invoking writ jurisdiction in tax matters, it's a very, very vast topic. And I had a bit of difficulty in making a very capsule speech, because it is such a vast thing that is difficult to conclude it in one seminar. So I'll be requesting you to just keep it enhancing on some related topic. But presently, what I have worked out is that I'll be giving you the background of the taxation. The background means the history of taxation, then the history of evolution of the concept of writ, and then the some good judgments, some settled law, the latest judgment, and I'll also address you on the point of the writ jurisdiction vis-a-vis Article 301 of the Constitution, as well as the Article 265 of the Constitution, because these are the relevant thing. What I thought that these are the relevant thing to be explained to you, so that we all be enriched by what I have just recapitulated. So let me start. So I'm just giving I'm starting with the historical background of the income tax laws. In India, the direct taxes have been levied for centuries. Two great literary works, that is Manu Smriti and Arthashastra, consist of detailed advice given to kings by wise sage on the matter of taxation. The Manu Smriti laid down the traders and the artisans should pay 1/5 of their profits in silver and gold, while the agriculturists were to pay 1/6, 1/8, or 1/10 of their produce depending upon the circumstances. India had developed a systematic tax structure before the Mauryan period. The basic tax was on land. It was usually called bhaga. Bhaga means in Hindi bhag, which was a fixed proportion of crop raised on land. The proportion was either 1/6 or 1/4. It was 1/3 in the case of fertile land. Several other taxes on cattle and livestock were imposed in India before the Muslim rule. The Mauryan income tax was levied on a particular class of people. Even today, all incomes are not taxed, and some kind of income are exempted from tax. For example, income tax is not levied on agricultural income. Apart from taxing a particular class, the Mauryans appear to have adopted the proportional system of income tax. The tax net was wide enough to include actors, dancers, musicians, jugglers, singers, musical instrument players, buffoons, mimics, rope dancers, heralds, etc. Now, the history of income tax in the present form can be traced to Income Tax Act 1860, which was imposed as a measure to meet the financial exigencies caused by Sipahi Mutiny of 1857. This was how the income tax was introduced in India for the first time by the British in the year 1860. The Act of 1860 was passed only for 5 years, and therefore it lapsed in the year 1865. It was replaced in the year 1867 by a license tax on professions and trades, and the latter was converted into a certificate tax in the following year. It was subsequently abolished in the year 1873. License tax on traders remained in operation till 1886, when it was merged with the Income Tax Act of that year. The Income Tax Act 1886 levied a tax on the income of residents as well as the non-residents in India. The Act defined agricultural income and exempted it from tax liability in view of the already existing land revenue, which was a kind of direct tax. The Act of 1886 exempted life insurance premiums paid by an assessee on the policies on his own life. Another important provision under this act was that the Hindu undivided family was treated as a distinct taxable entity. Thereafter, the Income Tax Act 1918 made receipt of casual or non-recurring nature pertaining to business or profession taxable. Although Income Tax Act in India has been a charge on the net income since inception, it was in the Act of 1918 that a specific provision was inserted for the first time pertaining to business deductions for the purpose of computing net income. The Act of 1918 remained in force for a short period and it was replaced by a new act, that is the Act 11 of 1922, in view of the reforms introduced by the Government of India Act 1919. The Income Tax Act 1992. The organizational history of the Income Tax Department goes back to the year 1922. One of the important aspects of 1922 Act was that it laid down the basis, the mechanism of administering the tax and the rates at which it was to be levied. The procedure brought in as much as it also brought the flexibility in adjusting the tax rates in accordance with the annual budgetary requirements and in securing the degree of elasticity for the tax system. Before 1922, the tax rates were determined by the Income Tax Act itself. And to revise the rates, the Act itself had to be amended. The Income Tax Act 1922 gave for the first time a specific nomenclature to various income tax authorities and laid down the foundation of a proper system of administration as per the provisions of the Income Tax Act 1922. It is the Income Tax Act 1961 which is currently operative in India. The present law of income tax in India is governed by the Income Tax Act 1961, which is amended from time to time by the Annual Finance Act, another legislation pertaining to direct taxes. The act, which came into force on 1st April 1962, replaced the Indian Income Tax Act 1922, which had remained in operation for 40 years. Furthermore, a set rules known as Income Tax Rules 1962 has been framed for implementing the various provisions of the Act. I'll also just quote the recommendation of the 58th Law Commission report submitted in 1974 on the particular issue of writ as well as tax. And in that Law Commission report, 58th report, it is stated, and I quote, "In the result, the scheme of the proceedings subsequent to the judgment of the tribunal would be that after the appellate tribunal has pronounced its judgment, an appeal will lie to the High Court on a substantial question of law, and against the appellate judgment of the High Court, an appeal will lie to the Supreme Court on a certificate of High Court that it involves a substantial question of law. The substantial question of law of general importance, which, in the opinion of the High Court, needs to be decided by the Supreme Court. In consequence," I'm just reading the Law Commission's report. "In consequence, Section 56 will need to be revised. Section 257 will need to be deleted. Section 258 to 262 may also be required to be deleted or amended." Now, ITAT. The Income Tax Appellate Tribunal is a quasi-judicial institution set up in January 1941 and specializes in dealing with the appeals under the Direct Tax Act. The order passed by the ITAT are final. An appeal lies to the High Court only if the substantial question of law arises for determination. ITAT was constituted on 25th of January 1941 by virtue of Section 5 capital A of the Income Tax Act 1922. Since its establishment, the ITAT is functioning more or less on a similar lines, except for necessary consequential changes introduced on account of its expansion and extension of its jurisdiction. There has been no fundamental changes either in the Constitution or the functioning of the tribunal in the Income Tax Act 1961. Now I'm coming to the origin of writ. The law of writs originated from the orders passed by King's Bench of England. A writ was precisely a royal order issued under a royal seal. It was used to be issued on a petition presented before the Kings in Council for the exercise of an extraordinary judicial power in the matter. The origin of the writ court had a specific reason. The jurisdiction of common law was static. It did not recognize rights except those already admitted and prevalent. Common law courts worked under a prescribed procedure with many limitations. Thus, there had been a number of cases that did not fall under any of the fixed remedies, and so these cases remained beyond the jurisdiction of common courts and were more or less static. Thus, the deficiency of remedy of failure of common law courts to grant relief on time became a cause and the ground of petition to the King in Council to exercise the extraordinary judicial powers. These petitions were heard and disposed of by or on behalf of the King's bench. A written order was issued in the name of the King, that is what we know as writ. In due course, writ became available to ordinary citizens, and because a prescribed fee was charged for these writs, filing of writ used to be called as purchase of a writ. This form of adjudication was also called prerogative writ because the element of discretion were involved therein. Now, the origin of writ in India. The Regulating Act of 1773, under which the Supreme Court was established at Calcutta by a charter of 1774, laid the foundation of the origin of writ jurisdiction in India. Similar charters with analogous provisions established Supreme Courts of Madras and Bombay in 1801 and 1823 respectively. Latest patents were given to all the three courts. These courts were subsequently replaced by the High Courts under the High Court Act 1861, which enjoyed all the powers those were already with the Supreme Court, whom they replaced. Thus, the three presidency High Courts inherited the power of issuing writs as the successor of the Supreme Court. It would be relevant and interesting to note that the High Court of Jharkhand, which is the successor court of Patna High Court, and the Patna High Court was established in the year 1916, which in which in turn was the successor of Calcutta High Court, one of the three presidencies High Courts. And therefore, the Patna High Court also had the inherent power to issue writs, as mentioned in the latest patent. It is equally interesting to mention that before coming into force of the Constitution of India, with effect from 26th of January 1950, the High Courts established under the High Court Act 1861, other than those which had succeeded the erstwhile three chartered presidency High Courts, did not have the power to exercise the writ, as the same was not mentioned in the latest patent of subsequent courts. Now, the fundamental rights were incorporated in Chapter 3 of the Constitution, which came in vogue from 26th of January 1950, ensuring the basic human liberties, fulfilling the hopes of justice and equity. To fructify these rights into actual liberties, detailed provisions were incorporated in the Constitution itself to safeguard the rights under Article 32 and 226 of the Constitution. Scrutiny of Article 32 would reveal that it guaranteed the remedy upon violation of any of the fundamental rights enshrined under Chapter 3 of the Constitution. It means that once it is established that a fundamental right provided in the Constitution is violated or breached, the Supreme Court is not empowered to refuse to hear the writ petition on any ground whatsoever. Of course, the relief would flow from the merit of the petition filed in this regard. Reference in this regard may be made to the case law reported in KK Kochuni versus State of Madras, reported in AIR 1959 Supreme Court, page 7275, wherein Justice S.R. Das, as his lordship was then, has, while quoting Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras, reported in AIR 1950 Supreme Court, page 124, has held as under, and I quote, under the Constitution, this court has been constituted as a protector of fundamental rights, and it cannot, consistently with the responsibility so laid upon it, to refuse to entertain applications seeking the protection of this court against infringement of such rights, although such applications are made to this court at the first instance without resort to the High Court having concurrent jurisdiction in the matter. The mere existence of alternate adequate remedy cannot per se be a good and sufficient ground for throwing out a petition under Article 32 if the existence of a fundamental right and a breach, actual or threatened, of such right is alleged and is prima facie established on a petition. Keeping in view the growth and development of law in India, and because the possibilities of a situation arising before the court which may not be covered under any of the 5 writs, the Constitution has consciously added, and I just inverting it, power to issue directions and orders, so that the constitutional courts don't face any constraint in providing an effective remedy in case of breach of fundamental rights. The court was given liberty to issue either of them as per the requirement in this situation. The horizon and option of the courts further broadened by adding the phrase in the nature of after the word writs. A quick look at the analogous provision of the Constitution in Article 226 of the Constitution of India. With regard to the writ jurisdiction, it would reveal that the power of High Court to issue writs orders the direction in appropriate cases is independent of such power of the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution. This power is more or less similar in nature as in Article 32, but wider in scope, in as much as the High Court can issue writs to a person or authority apart from any government and for any other purpose, in addition to enforcement of fundamental rights covered under Part 3 of the Constitution. The only constraint with the High Courts is that the High Courts are restricted to exercise these powers within their territorial jurisdiction if the cause of matter has taken place partly or wholly within their jurisdiction. Now, we all know that there are 5 types of writs. I will just hurriedly go through the concept of 5 writs. So I will start with habeas corpus. This writ is meant for remedy against the illegal confinement of a person. If a delinquent has caused injury or wrong by wrongful confinement, the person has to be discharged and delivered as a matter of swift remedy. The only precondition for issuance of writ of this nature is that the person should be confined and such confinement should be illegal. It is available to the weakest against the mightiest, with the only exception that the prison of law and the enemy alien. A petition under Article 32 would not lie whether the detention is by a private person and not by or under the authority of the state. However, in a case under Article 226 before the High Court, the same would lie. Such a petition, once dismissed, may be filed again on the basis of fresh evidence, and the principles of res judicata won't apply in such matter. Now, writ of quo warranto. This writ is issued basically to prevent the usurpers to occupy the public office, and the procedure involves a judicial inquiry after the court asks the occupant of the post to show cause as to under what authority he is holding the office in question. It's a device to control the executive directions in the matters to hold public office in question. The writ of quo warranto lies against the holder of the office. The person so removed shall not be reappointed. Writ of quo warranto is issued to prevent the continuous exercise of unlawful authority, but it cannot undo action already taken by such authority and cannot jeopardize the rights accrued by the individual in the process. Writ of mandamus. The primary purpose of issuance of this writ is to make the government work properly. It is a command directed to any person, incorporation, or any inferior tribunal requiring them to do a particular thing which pertains to the office and which is in the nature of public duty, as the public servants are responsible to the judiciary for the lawfulness of their public duty. If a public authority fails to do what is required under law or does beyond what was required to be done, a writ of mandamus may be issued to make that particular authority do what is required under the law. Mandamus can also be issued to a tribunal to compel it to exercise the jurisdiction vested in it, which has refused to exercise the same. The said writ may also be issued where there is a specific legal right, but no specific remedy for enforcement of such right. It can also be issued to compel the authority to use the discretion properly. Now, writ of certiorari. It is an order directing the inferior tribunal requiring the order of proceeding to be transmitted to the High Court to cause the directions of the tribunal or the authority which has assumed the jurisdiction which it did not possess, or where the order contains an error of law apparent on the face of record, or the authority having the duty to act judiciously acted more than their authority. Writ of prohibition. An order of prohibition is also directed to an inferior court or tribunal for forbidding the court or tribunal from proceeding in a particular manner. A writ of prohibition is appropriate to restrain a tribunal that threatens to assume a jurisdiction not vested in it, and there is an error of law apparent on the face of the record. Thus, the writ of certiorari and prohibition are two different writs issued at different stages of a judicial proceeding to check and regulate the proceedings before the inferior courts or the tribunals to exercise the jurisdiction appropriately, remaining within the prescribed limits of such jurisdiction. It checks the error of law in such a process. The brief discussions above regarding exercise of writ jurisdiction makes it clear that it's not a routine jurisdiction of the constitutional courts. Rather, it is an extraordinary jurisdiction meant for extraordinary purposes. The extraordinary power has many important features attached to it to expedite the delivery of justice. It originates from the existence of a right, as without right there is no remedy. The technical rules of procedure attached to civil courts are not strictly applicable in the writ matters. The provisions related to locus standi and limitations are not strictly applicable here, and the courts enjoy the wide discretion in such matters. Now I'll quote a very famous sentence from the judgment, this celebrated judgment of Minerva Mills, reported in 1980, volume 3, SCC 625, where the Honorable Supreme Court has held, and I quote, "Human ingenuity, limitless though it may be, has yet not devised a system by which a liberty of people can be protected except through the intervention of the courts of law." Now I'm going to the grounds of invoking the writ jurisdiction, particularly the tax matters. The taxes have been the lifeblood for good governance. Modern ambitious development schemes for the all-round progress of the society rest on the revenue generated through the medium of taxation. The power to levy tax is given to the authority by the Indian Constitution. The tax proceeds go to the general revenue of the state, which is utilized in implementation of various schemes run for the weaker section of the society as well as for the development of the country. However, the citizens of the democratic state have the advantage of being taxed only by enacting a valid legislation by the legislature. In India's federal constitution, the power of center and the constituent units are well defined. All the taxes that we pay are backed by laws passed either by the parliament or by the state legislature. India has two types of taxes, namely direct and indirect tax. The core difference between both the taxes lies in their implementation. Direct taxes comprise taxes which we pay directly to the government. Unlike direct taxes, the indirect taxes are not levied on individuals, but on the goods and services. Generally, the tax matters are dealt with by separate statutes which exhaustively deal with the provisions related to particular tax and also lay down the comprehensive mechanism for grievance redressal. The tax laws, either direct or indirect, provide separate hierarchy of grievance redressal procedure by means of quasi-judicial forums. For example, in the Income Tax Act, there are provisions related to appeals and revision. Any person aggrieved by the action taken against him under the Income Tax Act can move an application before the authority taking the action, that is the assessing officer. The Income Tax Act also provides for appeal before the Commissioner of Appeals under Section 246 capital A, before the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal under Section 253, before the High Court under 260 capital A, before the Supreme Court under Section 261. Apart from these, there are provisions of reference to the High Court for revision by the Principal Commissioner or Commissioner under Section 263 and 264 of the Act. Under the GST law, a taxpayer is allowed to apply for an advance ruling to obtain clarification from the authority for advance ruling, that is AAR. If the taxpayer or the revenue authority is agreed by the order passed by the AAR, they have the option to file an appeal before the appellate authority for advance ruling, that is AAAR, means AAAR. Under such situation, when the provision of taxing statute comprehensively deal with the tax and grievances redressal mechanism, little room is left for invoking the writ jurisdiction of the High Court in tax matters. However, there are few areas which can be dealt with exhaustively under writ jurisdiction by the High Court. A tax or a statute related thereto can be challenged by way of writ petition on following grounds. I'm just giving some of the grounds. Just it may not be exhaustive, but these cover almost all the fields. And these are lacking legislative competence vis-a-vis 7th schedule of the Constitution, violating the fundamental rights, especially those under Article 14 and 19(1)(g) of the Constitution, lacking the authority of law as required under Article 265 of the Constitution, being violative of Article 301 and 304 of the Constitution, or non-adherence to the procedure for the enactment of the statute laid down under Article 304. The remedy under the Act cannot be said to be adequate and is indeed negatory or useless if the Act which provides for such remedy is itself ultra-virus or void. There is no inflexible rule which can be applied with rigidity in every case, and the applicability of discretion is dependent upon the facts of the particular case. No doubt the fundamental rights guaranteed to the citizens are a significant feature of our Constitution, and the High Courts under Article 226 are bound to protect the fundamental rights, but the successive petition under Article 226 of the Constitution of India challenging the validity of any enactment is not maintainable. The question as to whether a notification could have a retrospective effect or retroactive operation, being a jurisdictional fact, can be determined by the High Court in the exercise of jurisdiction under Article 226 of the Constitution. As it is well known that alternative remedy is not a bar in a case an order of statutory authority is questioned on the ground that the same suffers from lack of jurisdiction. When on undisputed facts, the taxing authorities are shown to have assumed jurisdiction which they do not possess. Although under the GST law, the order passed by the AAAR, that is the appellate body, cannot be challenged in the High Court, a writ petition is maintainable when the said forum goes beyond its jurisdictional limits, breaches the principle of natural justice, or commits any substantial error of law. Now, Income Tax Act provides complete machinery for assessment of tax and for relief in respect of erroneous or improper orders made by the revenue authorities. The High Court should not encourage the tendency on the part of the assessee to rush to the High Court when an assessment order is made. The jurisdiction conferred on the High Court under Article 226 is not intended to supersede the jurisdiction of the authority, the taxing authorities, to deal with the merits of the contentions of the assessee. It would entirely be inappropriate to permit an assessee to move to the High Court under Article 226. So when a party is aggrieved, when the party is aggrieved has the alternative remedy, which he may resort to against the improper action of the taxing authority and does not avail himself the remedy, the High Court will require a strong case to be made out for entertaining a writ petition. A person who is aggrieved by an order of the revenue authority under this act cannot therefore be allowed to be abandoned the resort to the machinery and to invoke the extraordinary jurisdiction of the High Court under Article 226 unless a question of infringement of fundamental right arises, or on undisputed facts the taxing authorities are shown to have assumed jurisdiction which they do not possess, or acted without the authority of law, or refused to exercise the jurisdiction. Under Article 226, the Constitution has provided a remedy to a citizen to obtain redress in respect of a tax levied or collected under an invalid law. If the levy is illegal, the constitutional remedy goes in action. No tax, fee, or other pecuniary imposition can be levied by an instrument of subordinate legislation unless the statute specifically authorizes its imposition. Even the omnibus power conferred by carrying out of the purposes of the Act does not include the taxation. Mandamus lies for directing a revenue authority not to levy or collect an ultra-virus or an unconstitutional tax, or a tax which the authority has no jurisdiction to collect, or which is a colorable use of taxing power, even though the assessment has become final under the statute. In such cases, the writ court may issue to cancel a notice of illegal assessment or demand. The procedure for imposing liability to pay tax has to be strictly complied, and the liability of tax cannot be said to be in accordance with the law as provided under Article 265 of the Constitution. In absence of express provision in the Act, fee or tax cannot be levied by framing regulations. Theory of implied intent or ancillary powers are not applicable so far as the taxation issues are concerned. Assessment of tax by the assessing officer under the instruction from the higher authority is without jurisdiction, and the writ court will interfere. Whereas statute provides that a duty could be imposed by framing rules under the Act, no duty can be levied by an executive order without making the rules under the Act, and has to be subject to the limitations laid down in the statute and complying with the procedures prescribed herein. For example, by publication of the same in official gazette. When confiscation proceedings are taken and penalties imposed totally without authority of law, the court will interfere. I just want to convey to everyone that what I am reading here, these extracts have been taken from different Supreme Court judgments. All the propositions which I am telling are the extracts. If any learned lawyer wants to get all the citations from me, because I'm not giving the citations simultaneously, because it will consume further time. So if anybody wants, Mr. Rahul Sabu can tell me, I
Yes,
can furnish, master may furnish the copies of the same to the concerned lawyer, because whatever I'm saying, these are the extract of the ratio laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court in different judgments. Now, where the demand for payment of money is made without following the mandatory procedure provided in the Act and the authority acts without jurisdiction, such demand is liable to be quashed. This is again from a judgment. Where the statute provides for issuance of notice before an order is passed and the order is passed without notice, the writ court will interfere. When the action is taken under an ultra-virus statute, or whether the statute is intra-virus but the action is without jurisdiction, or where the principle of natural justice are violated, the judicial review would be available to the concerned person. It also lies for directing a taxing authority not to make or give effect to an ultra-virus or unconstitutional assessment. For example, where an assessment is made giving retrospective effect to a law which was not in fact retrospective. But where there is no question of infringement of fundamental rights or other constitutional provisions of assumption of jurisdiction, the High Court would not, in exercise of its extraordinary power under Article 226 of the Constitution, interfere with the assessment, levy or collection of tax on a question such as that the Revenue Tribunal did not record any finding on the ground, even though argued. There can be no seizure of document or any other property without legal authority, nor seized document can be retained beyond the period prescribed by the statute unless it is further extended after complying with the statutory provisions. In such cases, the direction could be issued to return the documents or the goods. In case of illegal search and seizure, the court may also direct payment of compensation apart from return of the seized goods in suitable cases. It was held by the Supreme Court that the power of search and seizure should be strictly construed, since the same offends the right to privacy guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution, and in case of any deviation from the procedure, the writ court will interfere. Imposition or recovery of tax may be challenged on an unreasonable restriction upon the fundamental rights, but not on the ground of mere excessiveness. It is also settled that the refund of tax already collected may be ordered in a proceeding for a writ of mandamus, where it is established that the tax was unconstitutional or illegal, or the recovery was not in accordance with law. When the levy of excise duty is found to be unconstitutional and it is proved that the burden was not has not passed on to the purchaser, the state cannot register the claim for refund of the person concerned on the concept of principles of unjust enrichment. The writ of mandamus may also be issued in such cases. Refusal to refund tax collected in excess of prescribed rate gives a right to the assessee to file a writ of mandamus for refund. High Court under Article 226 has the power for the purpose of enforcement of fundamental rights and the statutory right to give consequential relief by ordering repayment of money realized by the government without the authority of law. Whether refunds should be ordered in the exercise of the discretion will depend upon the facts of a particular case. Now, relief under Article 226 being discretionary, the court may refuse to direct the refund in such proceedings and direct the party to seek remedy of a civil suit where a petitioner is guilty of unreasonable delay, where the disputed question of fact has to be decided before giving such relief, where a triable issue as to the limitation could be raised if the relief had been claimed in a suit is raised by the respondent. The writ of certiorari may be issued to quash an order of assessment or the notice of demand, where the initial order on the basis of which the proceeding was started was ultra vires, so the proceeding became without jurisdiction. Where a proceeding for assessment of tax is ultra vires or violates the fundamental right, where the proceeding violates the principles of natural justice. Where the order of assessment is vitiated by want of jurisdiction, the writ court would simply pause the assessment without any further direction. However, where the order is vitiated not because of want of jurisdiction but because of some procedural defect or violation of principles of natural justice, which is curable by initiating a fresh proceeding, the writ court may give a direction to make a fresh assessment in accordance with law. Certiorari would lie against the revisional and appellate orders under the tax laws on jurisdictional grounds, notwithstanding the finality clause in the relevant statute. Now I'm going to the writ jurisdiction vis-a-vis Article 301. While the Constitution of India has to be engaged with and interpreted as an individual, as an indivisible whole, there are some parts of Constitution that are directly in tension with others. One such example is the tension between the power of the state government to tax and raise revenues on the one hand, and the constitutional directives to ensure free movement of trade and commerce within the territory of India, protected under Part 13 of the Constitution on the other. Intuitively, it is easy to say that prohibitively high entry taxes on goods with individual states will have the effect of hampering the free movement, but constitutionally, the position is far more complex. In the specific context of entry tax, the conflict can be narrowed down to Article 245 and 246, read with entry 52 of List 2 of the 7th schedule, which allows the state government to impose a tax on entry of goods into the state, and Article 304 of the Constitution, which allows the imposition of very limited restrictions on the freedom of trade and commerce, as an exception to Article 301, which requires the interstate trade and commerce to be free. The tax laws are not outside the purview of Part 3 of the Constitution, and therefore, if the tax law violates the freedom laid down under Article 301 and does not comply the requirements of the proviso to Article 304, Clause B of the Constitution, the same can be challenged under Article 226 before the High Court. In the case of a state legislature, a tax law which, not being purely compensatory, has for its direct object an activity or instrumentality of trade, commerce, and intercourse, shall have to be justified either under Article 304 or 305 of the Constitution. Now, Article 226 vis-a-vis Article 265. Not only the levy but also the collection of tax must be under the authority of some law, the procedure of which is provided by Article 110, 117, 123, 199, 207, and Article 213. This cannot be done by mere resolution of the House of a legislature or by way of an executive action or by subordinate legislation in absence of express statutory authority for such charge. The article casts a mandate to be operative both on the point of levy and also on collection. The tax to be levied must be within the competence of the legislature imposing the tax, and the validity of tax has to be adjudged with the reference to the competence of the legislature at the time the statute authorizing the tax was enacted. The law imposing the tax must have been validly enacted. The law must not be a colorable use of power or a fraud upon the legislative power to tax. The authority of law as envisaged under Article 265 does not include imposition or collection of tax by an administrative order, which is not referable to statutory provision. It cannot be done in exercise of executive power under Article 73 by the Union or under Article 162 by the state. Authority of law to levy or collect tax has to be specific and explicit and should be expressly provided. Power to tax cannot be inferred by implication. The source of power, which does not specifically speaks of taxation, cannot be interpreted by expanding its width to exclude therein to include therein the power to tax by implication or by necessary inference. There must be a charging section specifically empowering the state to levy the tax. Where an executive authority has been empowered to collect the tax by an invalid law or rule or by notification made thereunder, the writ court is empowered to interfere. The procedure, including the condition precedent laid down by such law, must be strictly complied in order to validate the levy or collection of tax. Now, the constitutional limitations upon the taxing powers. The authority of law mentioned in Article 265 means the authority of a valid law. This means that the tax proposed to be levied must be within the legislative competence of the legislature imposing the tax. The law must be validly enacted by a proper body which has the legislative authority, and the manner required to give the acts the force of law. The law must not be a colorable use or a fraud upon the legislative power to tax. The tax must not violate the conditions laid down in Article 13, that is, it must not violate the fundamental rights, as well as it must not also contravene the specific provision of the Constitution which impose the limitation on the legislative power relating to a particular matters. For example, Article 27, Article 276, Clause 2, Article 286, and Article 301, as I have already narrated. The remedy for violation of Article 265. Not being included in Part 3 of the Constitution, Article 265 does not confer a fundamental right. Hence, an application under Article 32 does not lie in case of an imposition not authorized by law. However, an application under Article 226 will lie for quashing an imposition made without authority of law or ultra vires the law under which the imposition is purported to be made, as the power under Article 226 is exercisable not only for the enforcement of fundamental rights, but for other purposes as well, subject, however, to Article 323 capital B 2A. The writ jurisdiction of the High Court can be invoked if a tax is sought to be levied without a valid law or without following a mandatory provision of law. Refusal to refund the tax collected in excess of prescribed rate is illegal, and hence a writ petition under Article 226 is maintainable to compel the refund. Where the imposition of tax is beyond the competence of legislative power, the court, while declaring the provision as unconstitutional, may also direct the refund of the tax so collected. Where the rate of tax was reduced retrospectively, the state is bound to refund the excess tax so recovered. Now, the general grounds for refusing the reliefs under Article 226. The exercise of power for other purposes, that is, the purposes other than the enforcement of fundamental right, is discretionary. Hence, in such cases, the application may be refused by the High Court upon a consideration of certain circumstances as disentitling the applicant to relief, even though he may have the legal right which has been infringed. For instance, if there is an alternative remedy. Now it is hotly debated, so let me quote. And as Mr. Mittal has in the very beginning has stated that yes, 50% of the writ petitions are not entertained on the ground of alternative remedy. So I'm just taking the opportunity to apprise all of us regarding the judgment rendered by the Honorable Supreme Court in the case of CIT versus Chabilal Das Agarwal, reported in 2014, Volume 1, SCC 603. Where the Honorable Apex Court has held in paragraph 19 particularly, and I'm just reading that, and I quote, thus, while it can be said that this court has recognized some exceptions to the rule of alternative remedy, where the statutory authority has not acted in accordance with the provisions of enactment in question, or in defiance with the fundamental principles of judicial procedure, or has resorted to invoke the provisions which are repealed, or when an order has been passed in total violation of the principles of natural justice, the proposition laid down in Tan Singh Nathmal versus Superintendent of Taxes, AIR 1964, Supreme Court 1419, Titagarh Paper Mills Company Limited versus State of Odisha 1983, Volume 2 SCC, page 433, and other similar judgments, that the High Court will not entertain a petition under Article 226 of the Constitution if an effective alternative remedy is available to the aggrieved person, or the statute under which the action complained of has been taken itself contain a mechanism for redressal of grievance still holds the field. Therefore, when a statutory forum is created by law for redressal of grievance, a writ petition should not be entertained ignoring the statutory dispensation. In the instant case, I'm just quoting the judgment of Shivlal Das Agarwal. The Act provides complete machinery for assessment and reassessment of tax, imposition of penalty, and for obtaining relief in respect of any improper orders passed by the revenue authorities, and the SSC could not be permitted to abandon that machinery and to invoke the jurisdiction of the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution when he had adequate remedy open to him by way of an appeal to the Commissioner of Income Tax Appeal. The remedy under this statute, however, must be effective and not a mere formality with no substantial relief. In Ram and Shyam Company versus State of Haryana, reported in 1985, Volume 3, SEC, page 267, this court has noticed that an appeal is from seizure to seizur's wife. The existence of alternative remedy would be a mirage and an exercise, and that exercise will be a futility. In the instant case, neither has the SSC writ petitioner described the available alternate remedy under the Act as ineffectual and the non-efficacious while invoking the writ jurisdiction of the High Court, nor has the High Court ascribed the cogent and satisfactory reason to the reason to have exercised the jurisdiction in the facts of the instant case. In the light of the same, we are of the considered opinion that the writ court ought not to have ought not to have entertained the writ petition filed by the SSC, wherein he has only questioned the correctness or otherwise of the notice issued under section 148 of the Act, the reassessment orders passed and the consequential demand notices issued thereon. Further, I'll also like to just read out a latest judgment that is reported in 2019 SSC online, Supreme Court, page 1500. This was decided by the Honorable Supreme Court on 22nd of November 2019, and the case is Genpact India Private Limited versus Deputy Commissioner of Income Tax and another. And I'm just reading the judgment, and I quote, "We now turn to the question whether the High Court was justified in refusing to entertain the writ petition because of the availability of the adequate appellate remedy. The law on point is very clear and was summarized in the Commissioner of Income Tax versus Chabilal Das Agarwal, that is 2014 volume 1 SEC, page 603, which I have just read out. Before discussing the fact proposition, we would notice that the principle of law as laid down by this court, it is a settled law that non-entertainment of petition under writ jurisdiction by the High Court when an efficacious alternative remedy is available is a rule of self-imposed limitation. It is essentially a rule of policy, convenience, and discretion rather than a rule of law. Undoubtedly, it is within the discretion of the High Court to grant relief under Article 226 despite the existence of the alternative remedy. However, the High Court must not interfere if there is an adequate efficacious alternative remedy available to the petitioner and he has approached the High Court without availing the same, unless he has made out an exceptional case warranting such interference, or there exists sufficient ground to invoke the extraordinary jurisdiction under Article 226. And the references of several earlier judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court has been quoted thereafter. I'm just reading further, paragraph 12 of the state judgment. The constitution benches of this court in KS Rashid and Sons versus Income Tax Investigation Commission reported AIR 1954 SEC, Sangram Singh versus Election Tribunal, AIR 1955, Supreme Court 425, so and so and so. The other judgments have been quoted if lawyer wants, these are the, I think this is the reported judgment you can see. In those cases, it has been held that though Article 226 confers very wide powers in the matter of issuing writs, the remedy of writ is absolutely discretionary in character. If the High Court is satisfied that the agreed party can have the adequate or suitable remedy elsewhere, it can refuse to exercise its jurisdiction. The court, in extraordinary circumstances, may exercise the power if it comes to the conclusion that there has been a breach of principles of natural justice or the procedure required for decision has not properly been adopted. So many judgments have again been quoted by the Honorable Supreme Court. So this is a judgment to be worth reading, and I'll be just advising the learned lawyers to go through this judgment, because all previous judgment on this particular point have been quoted in this judgment. This is 2019 SSC online Supreme Court page 1500. That is the judgment of Genpact India Private Limited versus Deputy Commissioner of Income Tax and another. I'm just reading the paragraph 15 of the said judgment. Thus, while it can be said that this court has recognized some exceptions to the rule of alternative remedy, that is where the statutory authority has not acted in accordance with the provisions of enactment in question or in defiance with the fundamental principles of judicial procedure, or has resorted to invoke the provisions which are repealed, or when an order has been passed in total violation of the principles of natural justice. The proposition laid down in Tan Singh Nathwal's case, that is AR 1964 Supreme Court 1419, Titagarh Paper Mills case 1983 volume 2 SEC page 433, and other similar judgments, that the High Court will not entertain the petition under Article 226 of the Constitution if effective alternative remedy is available to the aggrieved person, or the statute under which the action complained of has been taken itself contains the mechanism for redressal of the grievance, still holds the field. Therefore, when the statutory forum is created by law for redressal of grievance, a writ petition should not normally be entertained ignoring the statutory dispensation. Recently, in the case of authorized officer, State Bank of Travancore versus Matthew Casey, that is reported in 2018 volume 3 SEC, page 85, the principles laid down in the case of Chabilal Das Agarwal were reiterated as under. The discretionary jurisdiction under 226 of the Constitution of India is not absolute, but has to be exercised judiciously in the given facts of the case and in accordance with law. The normal rule is that a writ petition under Article 226 of the Constitution ought not to be entertained if the alternative remedy is available, except in the cases falling within the well-defined exceptions as observed in the case of CIT versus Chabilal Das Agarwal. Now, continuing further regarding in the cases in which the writ petition may not be entertained, and those examples are: the conduct of the applicant is such that he does not deserve the discretionary remedy, that is, if he is guilty of the laches or acquiescence, that he has not come with the clean hands, the applicant has waived his legal rights, not the fundamental rights, rather the legal rights, by his conduct in circumstances similar to those required to constitute a estoppel. The applicant has misrepresented or suppressed the material facts, thus misleading the writ court. The disputed facts have to be investigated in order to give relief to the petitioner. The petition is premature. The writ petition would be futile or ineffective or of a mere academic interest. The petition has become infructuous by reasons of subsequent orders which have not been challenged. The petition has applied for revision and has failed in that. The court may not interfere with the exercise of the discretionary power in absence of any special circumstance. In general, the court cannot enter into a political as distinguished from a legal issue, but a question ceases to be political when the constitution or a statute has to be interpreted to answer the particular question. Such interpretation is the duty of the court. Whenever an assessee chose to attack an assessment order by filing a writ petition on the ground that a sale was made in course of import and therefore exempted from tax, the High Court may decline to entertain a petition, as no exceptional circumstance would be existing for exercise of such power conferred to the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution. High Court should also be reluctant to interfere against mere a so-called notice. A petition filed for the purpose of obtaining interim orders and thereafter to prolong a proceeding by one device or the other should strongly be discouraged. In exercise of its power of judicial review, the writ court should not interfere with the matters of government policy except on the certain constitutional grounds such as violation of fundamental rights, transgression of statutory powers. Now I'm concluding this lecture. So now we have come to this, that the judicial review is the basic structure of the constitution, which entrusts that the power of that entrusts the power to the judiciary. Judiciary is sentinel on the qui vive to protect the liberty and the rights of the citizen, apart from keeping the other organs of the state to exercise that process within the confines of the constitution and the laws. It would thus be clear that though the dispute relating to taxation matter is cognizable by the forum prescribed under the related act, the power of judicial review of the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution of India, being a constitutional mandate, cannot be taken away by any legislation. The power to issue writ is exercisable by the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution of India in an appropriate matter in case of exigencies in a tax issue. Thus, there is some exception to the general rule that the writ is not entertained in a case where the effective alternative remedy is available to the aggrieved person, or the statute under which the action complained of itself contains a mechanism for redressal of grievance. In cases where the statutory authority has not acted in accordance with the provisions of the enactment in question, or in defiance of the fundamental principles of judicial procedure, or has resorted to invoke the provisions which are repealed, or when the order has been passed in total violation of the principles of natural justice, a writ petition may be entertained and an appropriate order may be passed. However, Article 226 is not meant to short circuit or circumvent the statutory procedures. Rather, it is exercised only when the statutory remedies are entirely ill-suited to meet the demands of extraordinary situations. The judiciary always maintains a delicate balance between the state's responsibility and duties and the individual rights and interests. There is always a presumption in favor of the constitutionality of the statute, and the burden is upon the person who attacks it to show that there has been a clear transgression of constitutional principles. The standard or the test adopted by the highest judiciary of the land in evaluating the rights under this jurisprudence on the one hand, under this criminal and civil jurisprudence on the one hand, and the tax jurisprudence on the other are different. The legislature is generally given wider latitude in taxation and the fiscal matters by the constitutional courts while applying the test of equality, arbitrariness, and reasonableness on such taxation, fiscal, or other obligatory matters. So this is what I prepared for you for the purpose of the enhancement of everyone's knowledge, including me. And I got the opportunity to go through the taxation law, the background as the latest law, and I just try to summarize all those before you. You may also get a copy of my write-up or the lecture if you want. It can be given to you, or the judgments which have been taken note of while preparing this may also be obtained on request from my court master. I'm also thankful to everyone who listened to me so patiently. I think I've taken much time which I was told I will be taking, because I knew that the topic is such that I'll be compelled to take some more time as was given to me. So thank you everyone. Thank you for the indulgence to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lordship.
We are enlightened and delivered by your Lordship. We are indeed very grateful to you. In your address, meticulous situations where the writ jurisdiction can be invoked by the assessor in the tax matter. Extracts of the judgment rendered by the Supreme Court in various ways cited by your Lordships are extremely beneficial for the members of the bar. Lordships, in your address, you have also explained us that there is no absolute bar in entertaining a writ application under Article 226, despite an executive remedy under the statutory provision. You have also meticulously explained us that when there is a grave injustice to the taxpayers, statutory remedies are entirely ill-suited, and the petitioner and the dealer or the petitioner questions the virus or the notifications and the circulars, the High Court can entertain the petition under Article 226 of the Constitution of India. And Lordships, we would be extremely beneficial if your Lordship shares the citations delivered by you here in the webinar. Now, I request all the participants to kindly keep their microphone in the mute mode so that we can have a short question and answer round. I would request Srimati Rashma, Mr. Ashok Kumar.
I'm just finding some comments on the chat, chat room.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Mr. Bhavan Prasad has asked for the copy of this lecture. I will provide it, Mr. Bhavan Prasad. I will provide it. I will tell the court master to give a copy of this so that you can keep this with yourself and it can be used for any academic purpose. And most of the learned lawyers which are online, the chat room, they have just given the thanks to me. So I'm deeply thankful to all of you. Thank you so much. And Mr. Rahul Sabu, I'm also thanking you being the coordinator. Just keep on convening such seminars because this period of difficulty has given us this opportunity to get together and to discuss, to know the law with regard to a particular issue. Because generally all the lawyers as well as the judges don't get time to go to a particular law. Because the lawyers may have the option of choosing the particular field of law, but the judges don't have that right of or the option to have that consideration of choosing a particular field of law. So this also gives the opportunity to us to a particular field of law and to enhance knowledge as well as to all the learned lawyers. Thank you so much. Thank you for the patient hearing, all the learned lawyers. Thank you. So I think
Thank you, sir.
I would request Mr. Bhanu Kumar ji to kindly convey the vote of thanks.
Mr. Bhanu Kumar,
my
you are online.
lords, may it please your lordship,
Yes,
this
yes,
topic
yes.
was very complex, but my lords, in a lucid manner, clarified all the things right from origin of Income Tax Act 1922, 1961, 58 Law Commission report, then establishment of ITAC in 1941, establishment of various charter high courts, then the landmark Minerva Mills case. Very important case, of course, my lord. Then my lords dealt upon direct indirect taxes and the forums, then the GST. Then my lords dealt upon the articles 265, 301, 304, 14, 19 and legislative competence and 7th schedule, retrospective, prospective, without jurisdiction, grounds of challenge, where on which ground GST can be challenged, natural justice, without jurisdiction, in what cases refund can be ordered by the court. Then my lords very elaborately told about provisions of Article 301, 245, 246, 304, 305, then collection of revenue, very important topic, Article 265, 110, 117, 207, 213, fraud and colorable exercise of power. Then my lords were pleased to observe that mere executive powers under 73, Article 73 or 162, it cannot levy or collect any tax. Then the constitutional limitations. Then my lords at last spoke about the alternative remedy and the two landmark decisions of Agrawal case 2014 1 SCC 603 and 2019 online 1500. We will be going through the cases. We are basically not tax lawyers, but the manner in which my lords explained everything in a lucid manner, a very good concept and background has been entrenched in our mind. Now, what has emerged from my lord's speech and deliberations, that courts are, this is the basic philosophy of various provisions of constitutions, courts are very slow in tax matters, onus is very heavy upon the litigant who challenges any provision. And I would like to convey to all my lawyer colleagues, seniors and juniors and friends, that this is not a view of a lawyer, but it is view of my lord's judge, who has played match on both sides. We have seen my lords appearing in a large number of tax cases in court number 1 and articulating his argument and defending the state government in a very nice manner. So this view, we respect a lot, my lords, because this view is coming from my lord's mouth. And all of us know my lords have got a very long innings to play and go. And therefore, I, on behalf of all my colleagues, my senior colleagues and friends, we thank my lords once again for the time, for the precious time he has spared for enlightening us, and for the well-researched, much valuable speech for the lawyers. And we will try to get copies from Mr. Rahul Saboo. I again thank Mr. Rahul Saboo for coordination, and he is utilizing this time of COVID-19 in a very creative manner. So I thank to Mr. Rahul Saboo, and also I convey my thanks to our senior advocate, Mr. M.S. Mittal, for welcoming my lords. So lastly, I, on behalf of the entire bar, we are wishing you, are giving you our best wishes. And lastly, thanks to my lords for this very good speech.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone who has been online today and listening to me patiently. I wish everyone a very keep yourselves safe and healthy during this difficult period, and maintain social distancing. Don't go out with any urgent. Thank you. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
very
much.
for your hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Lordship.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lordship.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mirad.
Thank you, Lordship.
लॉर्डशिप चले गए अब।
Rahul ji, many thanks and congratulations
Thank you,
for such a successful